In the Resident Evil 4 remake, there's a unique little challenge called the Minimalist Challenge, in which you, the player, must beat the game only utilizing pistols and knives. It's a legitimately challenging way to play the game that requires the player to be at their very best in order to succeed, and emphasizes the survival aspects that otherwise take somewhat of a backseat in the game. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something a little sillier. So, for this challenge, I decided to do the Minimalist Challenge, but instead of using pistols, I'm going to do it with only Leon's trusty pump-action shotgun, the W-870. Now you might be thinking, how the hell is that a challenge? See, there's a couple of things that make this run harder than it first may seem. For one, the supply of ammunition. The game offers far fewer static drops for shotgun shells. Enemies seem to almost never drop shells if they do at all. You start off with an attaché case that literally makes the game give you more handgun bullets, and most importantly, the crafting mechanic, in which you combine little bags of metal with gunpowder to make bullets, is very harsh towards shotguns, requiring 12 gunpowder to make a measly 6 shells, which is more than double the gunpowder needed to craft the handgun ammo, which needs 5 gunpowders to craft 10 rounds. On top of that, in the Minimalist run, you can utilize any of the game's pistols to complete your objectives. The power of the Red 9, the penetration of the Punisher, and the super effective burst fire of the Matilda. All of these little perks make the challenge just a tad easier. For me though, I can't use any of the other shotguns in the game other than the W-870. This isn't a shotgun challenge, it's a W-870 challenge, meaning 0 of these extra perks for me. Buckshot only. So are you seeing how this is a little more challenging than it first seems? Here are the rules I gave myself. 1. The only gun I'm allowed to fire is the W-870, of course. There are some leniencies that the Minimalist run allows, such as the cannons at the castle, the harpoons, and the rocket launcher in the saddler fight, so of course I'm allowed to use them too. The game also forces you to use a Red 9 in the minecart section, and since I'm certain that you'll die if you don't fire it, I'm allowing that to slide as well. 2. Knives are obviously allowed. Parries, stealth kills, slashy, all that's fine. 3. To combat the abuse of multiple saves, I decided that I was not allowed to go back to prior saves. If I reached a segment in which I was running low on supplies, then I had to find my way through it. No going back to redo sections a little better. 4. Upgrades are permissible. It isn't frowned upon in the pistol Minimalist run, so it won't be here either. And 5. And as for charms, there are 2 specific ones that I targeted for this run, that being the 2 which increase the crafting chance for shotgun shells. But to add just a little more of a challenge to it, I've decided that I will only be able to do each challenge once. Whatever coins I get, and whatever charm I get. Understood? Good. Let's begin. Now the first hurdle is, of course, getting to the shotgun. It's not the hardest thing to do, as there's only a handful of enemies on the way, but of course I'm me. So while I try and slip around the first villager as I escape the basement, I somehow get caught outside of his reach. Because of course I do. I deal with him, and I sneak past the others before doing a sweet Jackie Chan move out the window. So far so good. From there on, it's really just a sprint to the village. I make a few stops to pick up some pesetas and whatever else is laying around to sell later on. When I do get to the village, I sneak around and clear off a few of the straggling villagers, before making a beeline indoors to the shotgun. Now, I obviously could have gone a little stir-crazy and turned some heads into soup, but saving ammo was paramount, so I decided it'd be best to just run out the clock. Which I immediately mess up by wasting 3 shotgun shells trying to hit the lantern in the small barn. Now if that's not a sign for things to come, I don't know what is. Thankfully, it's not that much of a challenge. You can just circle the village over and over until the bell rings, then collect as many of the drops as possible. With the scarcity of shotgun shells in the game, collecting as much gunpowder as possible would more than likely be the kicker in some situations. Anyways, with the village segment clear, I do one last check for anything I missed and head out with a grand total of 4 shotgun shells to my name. I try to stealth my way through the windmill, which goes well, picking up the shells on the small ladder, getting the cog, and escaping over the bridge without firing a single shot. From there, it's just a simple sprint through the valley into the fishing village, and through the house to Lewis, with only 1 shot fired the entire time. After a scuffle with the Undertaker, I wake up chained to Lewis without my shotgun, so I have to sneak through the refinery to get it back. I also make sure to stab some rats here for the spinels, which I plan on using to purchase gunpowder later on. It's also here that I'm able to first upgrade the shotgun, increasing the power, rate of fire, and reload speed once each. I waste little time getting the hexagonal emblem, almost dying once to one of the dynamite Garrados, and using only 3 shots in the entire segment, which should have been 2, but I get no luck. I juke the chainsaw fella and spend a little more time than I feel I should on the glass orb puzzle, and make it to the end of chapter 2 with 9 shells. Even though it was a terrible decision tactically, I released the dog from its trap, and after taking the easy way out with the dogs by escaping through the house, I used 2 shots to clear my path on the way to the graveyard. I get the first Viper to get that task started, and secure some more shells and gunpowder. At our second encounter with the merchant, I start upgrading my knife as well, as it will eventually become the hero of this run. I clear the graveyard, break the sigils on the tombstone, and make it across the rickety rafters and to the merchant once more, this time only using 2 shells to kill the dogs in El Gigante's arena so I can clear the loot. My first shooting range challenges actually go amazing, getting S ranks on all 3 available. This gets me 3 gold tokens and 9 silver tokens. As I said prior, my goal was to get the 2 charms which offer increased crafting chances, and while you may not believe me, I actually got the 15% chance increase on my 3rd charm. Swear to God. I also got a charm which lowers the price of weapon upgrades. It's no hassle to get the fuel, and then Del Lago is a pushover. Of course. Chapter 3 ends with a huge 24 shells in my pocket. The big test in the beginning of Chapter 4 is of course the gross head explodey fellas. I use 2 shells on the first one I meet, which actually is a pretty good sign. It means that they'll go down quicker later on when I get the upgrades. But then I figure out that 1 good shot to the parasite will take them out already. So fuck yeah! I rush around the lake, getting the 2 heads, collecting the giant fish for the spinels, and the golden egg, procuring the insignia, and making it back to the merchant, where I upgrade the reload speed, rate of fire, and capacity once each. Going into the El Gigante fight, I had 23 shells. Sounds pretty good, right? Wrong. It only took 2 shells to the face to cause its parasite to spawn, but some terrible trigger discipline had me miss several shots before the ogre fell to his knees. By the time the dog entered, I was already down to 12. Despite shooting the bastard in the face, it took 3 shells this time to stagger him. But thankfully the scripted event put Gigante into his knees without my doing. I pumped a bunch more shells into the parasite and I actually ran out, which led to a few minutes of me sprinting around to find any I could, before realizing I had the ability to craft some. I did this, used them up, and El Gigante still wasn't dead. So, I had no other option. I let myself die. Second time round, I was much more careful with my shots, getting in close so that the spread wasn't as drastic, only shooting when Gigante stood perfectly still, things like that. This got me to the second part with 17 shells instead of 10. This helped obviously, but the real kicker was that the game took pity on me and gave me a few extra shells in one of the cabins, which allowed me to keep up the assault and finish off El Gigante with the remaining 8 shells. After making it into the church, I realized that I had Ashley's armor on, so I had to quit out and fix that real quick. Because, let's be honest, this challenge is already hard enough, so making it a little more difficult can't really sting, can it? I immediately regret taking the armor off as Ashley gets smacked around the graveyard a couple of times and I run out of shells trying to save her. Second time though, I just sprint through and manage to escape with 5 shells. There's little trouble as we get through the village and to the windmill, but it's at the cabin that we really take a turn for the worse. Going in with only 4 shells seems like it's going to be a bad time, but I can assure you, it's actually much worse than that. I only collect 3 extra shells from the crates, and I need to rely on my knife and sweet crouching tiger skills to deal with the horde. I do manage to collect just enough gunpowder to craft 8 more shells, but in my hastiness, I waste most of them on enemies outside the windows. I managed to get upstairs through pure luck, but with no ammo to speak of. So I thought, game over. Thankfully, I had an absurd amount of healing items, so I went for broke and dashed around until the Minotaur turned up. This helped a bunch. I used his Tornado of Terror attack to damage the Ganados in the hope that they drop something for me, and it got me just enough gunpowder to craft 6 shells right as Ashley broke open the door and we escaped, ending Chapter 5 with 5 shells in the chamber. Nabbing some shells, as well as some gunpowder outside the merchant's hut, boost my stash to 14. I use one of these to escape the horde that hang out in the wooden maze, and 2 more to kill the headburster who hangs out by himself. This gives me 11 going into the Twisted Sister fight. I had no idea how to handle this. My first thought was to just stay inside the room and headshot them. But that didn't do great, so I ran outside and tried to lure them all into the oil lamps and set them on fire. That too didn't really work. Because of this, I ran out of shells and spent around 5 minutes running around, hoping that one of the sisters would cut down a Ganado and give me some ammo. No luck. Second time, I tried to use the chainsaws from the very beginning, running around and baiting the sisters into cutting their brethren into ribbons. That too did not go in my favor. But the third time, I just decided to go all out on the sisters themselves. I tried to get both sisters with one shot, and I managed to secure a melee attack on one and a stabbing on the other before getting set on fire myself. This actually ended up being my savior, as the fire spread to the sisters, did insane damage, and allowed me to finish them off just before running out of shells. From there, I just ran away, used the crank on the door before any of the remaining Ganados got in, and escaped. I guide Ashley through the gorge, use a few shells to clear the way, and after picking up some free shells outside of his arena, I go into the Mendez fight with 9 to my name. My first attempt at the Big Cheese ended horribly. I spent every shell into his gross body, including a couple into the eye on his back, and despite picking up some more from a crate, entered the second phase with only 2 shells to my name. I tried my best to only use these last 2 precious shells on the red barrels to get some damage, but it wasn't enough. Thus began a saga of me doing my damnedest to figure out some way to damage Mendez, just enough to get to the second phase with just enough shells to fight back, such as climbing up to the platform and parrying his attacks until I could shoot him in the back, or doing the diving stab from the upper platform instead of popping shells into it. None of these were effective. To add to my pain, I only had 8 gunpowders going into this fight, and the game was not playing along. I may get 1 or 2 each attempt, and then none for the following 3. It seemed that Resident Evil gods were not happy with my progress so far and didn't want me going any further. But after nearly 10 attempts and nearly 10 deaths, I got the luck I sorely needed. After sprinting around to collect the supplies, one marvelous crate gifted me 5 extra shells. I was not letting that go to waste. I used every shot on Mendez's back eye, stabbed him twice, and got into the second phase with 7 shells. I used all of these on their barrels for big damage, and then slashed away at him when he swung in close. It was by far the hardest Mendez fight that I've had in all of my playthroughs of Resident Evil 4, both remake and original. I took a bucket load of hits, but my stash of healing items kept me afloat. I actually ran out of shells again, but I was not letting my progress be for nothing. I fought Mendez with nothing more than my knife for nearly 8 minutes, running low on everything I had, until the bastard cried out for his master and fell at my feet, allowing me to escape his arena and by extension the village without 1 single shell in my gun. I get a few shells from a barrel, and with nothing to upgrade, I make my way into Salazar's keep, taking out the first centipede motherfucker with 1 solid shot to the chops. Ashley gets struck down by one of the catapults, but we recover and I gather just enough gunpowder for some crafting. Some poor luck getting the cannon to raise leads me to use the golden egg to recover some health, which I must admit I had completely forgotten to sell simply because I was so used to keeping it because I use it on Salazar. I managed to make it back to the cannon, but unfortunately Ashley dies while I try to clear out the catapults. This unfortunately started a series of attempts where Ashley and I would die over and over and over again, trying to break open the gate. Surprisingly, always to the cannons themselves. But eventually, everything fell into place and I managed to make it into the castle with 8 shells. all of which were used to take out Salazar's soldiers right away. I do find a few more outside the Garrador cell, but I choose not to use them. Instead, I opt for the more conservative tactic of stab and sprint the fuck away. This is actually much easier than it would first seem. I have to use a few shells to unlock the animal puzzle, but I'm able to replenish them with a series of gunpowder drops I collect in the following rooms. Meaning I went into the greatest room in video game history, the water room, with 10 shells to my name, which immediately disappear while saving Ashley. I'm not gonna lie, this room is fucking garbage. Like, not even in the context of the challenge, just like in general. It's a terribly designed room and it completely ruins the castle for me. It took 3 tries to make it past the first segment, but the next segment was a fucking nightmare. I went into this with 8 shells. I had to place every shot as perfectly as humanly possible because if I didn't pop heads, Ashley was more or less dead. 2 attempts went by with me running out of ammo and still several of Salazar's priests stalking Ashley. I would sprint around the room hoping that any of the barrels would drop me some excess shells, but no luck. It would always end up with Ashley either being carried off or me slashing my way through hordes of enemies hopelessly. Several more attempts went by, and while I made progress, with Ashley securing one of the platforms and managing to make it to the next wheel before things fell apart, I still ended up with no ammo and Ashley being dragged into the darkness. And to top it off, the game still wouldn't cut me some slack. All I collect were pesetas and handgun bullets. On the off chance I would get some gunpowder, I'd end up with just under the requirement to craft more shells. I honestly thought it was over. Like, I'm not kidding. I just didn't have the ability to clear out all the enemies in time for Ashley to do her job. Nothing at all was working in my favor. And to make things worse, I was getting frustrated, which meant I was missing more shots, which made me more frustrated. And then I found something. See, when Ashley is captured by Garrador after finishing the first wheel, the Garrador will pick her up and carry her across the bridge to the door on the opposite side of the room. That meant I didn't need to clear the way. All I had to do was kill the first 2 who come after Ashley, let her get captured, and then allow the Garrador to carry her all the way across the room, where I could kneecap the Garrador and let her turn the second wheel. It is possibly the simplest way to deal with this room that I never in a million years would have figured out if it weren't for the fact of me needing to do this room over a dozen times. And surprisingly, as soon as I found that out, the game thought it'd be the perfect time to gift me more shells in one of the crates. Ashley finally managed to raise the platforms and I escaped with 1 shell, which quickly became the 7 I closed the chapter on the other side of the bridge. I get 3 more shells and I immediately use 2, getting the scratched emerald for the spinels. I kill the zealot for his sweet demon lantern, and I run into Ada, who, let's be honest, looks 1,000 times better as a blonde. On my next meeting with the merchant, I pick up the body armor since I'm drowning in pesetas, and I head onto the ramparts with only 4 shells. I have to use a lot of them to cut the weights, so I ignore the enemies as much as humanly possible. This is surprisingly easy if you know the pathing, so I managed to make it across the castle walls to the cannon and kill the ogre with no hassle at all, all while increasing my ammo count to 8. Now the hedge maze was actually a spot where I thought I'd have a lot of trouble, but surprisingly, no. The hounds went down with 1 shot each, and each of the priests got their heads popped without ever putting a hurting on me. I get a half a dozen shells from around the statue hall, or whatever it's called, and I meet the merchant once more. I sell off all my excess treasure, and I have more than enough to crank the shotgun's upgrades to max, even managing to get the exclusive perk that doubles my damage. Now I thought this would help, I had always planned to get it, but I had no idea that it would be this good. This perk alone cuts the difficulty of this challenge by about 80%, and it made me barely think of it as a challenge anymore. But, of course, I kept going, because why the fuck not? I do the second round of shooting range challenges, and I managed to secure another charm that I could actually use. One that increases ammo resale values by 40%. That's actually going to come in handy. Some more looting allows me to craft a bunch more shells, and then my goal becomes getting the 3 parts of the statue. Clearing through the dining room puzzle without a hitch, then cutting down what felt like an entire army in the gallery, and then using the blue fire against the suits of armor, which I still use up all my shells in defeating. Ashley's segment went the way you'd expect, so I'm not going to show that off, and I go into the next chapter with no shells at all. I actually go through the entirety of Ashley's section again with Leon in the hopes I'll pick something up. But no luck. What I do get though, upon visiting the merchant, is the ability to buy 10 more gunpowder with spinels, so that gets me 6 shells for the Novistadors. I rush through that room, only shooting the bugs that block my way, and get a lucky drop of 6 more shells in one barrel. This gets me to the Garrador duo with 14 shells. Now, this fight sucks with a full arsenal, but with only a shotgun and a knife, it sucks bad. What I can do is lure the Granados to the furthest part of the room from the Garradors and slash them up without the Garradors breaking free. This allows me to collect what I can around the room, which stacks my ammo stores up to a whopping 25 shells. But the Granados keep spawning, and I can't keep the stabbing spree up forever. So my tactics change to letting the Garradors break free and trying to use them to cull the herd, so to speak. This kind of works. For a while. Then shit went sour and I found myself missing a torso. Not good. Second time around, I managed to clear up the Granados with my tag team partners and focus on using the knife to do the damage, then pumping a few shots into each of the exposed parasites to finish each one of the Garradors off. I catch up with Ashley, who for some reason has been working on a Wolf Hawkfield impression, and I get dropped into a pit. I sprint through said pit, avoiding the Novistadors as much as I can, and after some crafting and looting, I go into the Verdugo fight with 27 shots to use. Now I did consider not shooting and just running out the clock, but it's not really a challenge if you skip a boss fight, is it? So I did the only thing I could. I froze the bastard and I pumped him full of hot lead. The double damage upgrade was clearly working overtime because I managed to turn the Verdugo into dust in only 24 shots. And I also picked up a bunch more shells throughout the fight, which had me leave the sewers with 12 in total. I do the third set of shooting range challenges, but nothing really comes of it. And I get the Combat Knives 2x speed exclusive perk, then sprint alongside Lewis through the mines. The twin El Gigante fight turns out to be a breeze, with only 9 shells finishing off the first one, and 1 more to detonate the dynamite on the back of the second. We get through both sides of the minecart section without dying, and cleared a Novistador's hive without any trouble. I play Knifey Spoony with Krauser, realize smoking kills, and find my way back up to the castle, up the Tower of Terror, which turned out to be much harder than first anticipated, and I go into the Salazar battle with 1 shell in my gun. Thankfully, there's a static drop of 10 gunpowder up the stairs to the right, and I collect several more shells and gunpowders in other barrels around the room, so I did actually have a fighting chance. Except for the fact that I cannot for the life of me escape Salazar's grab attack, which is a fucking insta-kill. Multiple attempts fail before they even really begin, all with me being turned into the big squid's dinner. Eventually, I get into the mindset that being away from Salazar is better than being close to him, and I just begin to circle around the room until I have an opening. The best of which I found was when the squid hangs above the entrance to the room, where I could floor him with 1 shot, and then drop down and stab the little freak. This isn't foolproof. In fact, it gets me eaten a few more times, but it does work. So I develop a strategy of shooting him down, stabbing him, and then running back up, and repeating it all over again. I run out of shells, and end up needing to slash the absolute fuck out of him. A couple dozen cuts, and a little bit of luck, and the ugly bastard finally dies, leaving me with no shells, just less than enough gunpowder to craft some, and no healing items. Great. On making it to the island, I try to stealth my way through the ruins of the fort. Craftily setting up the automatic turrets to do some damage for me starts off well, but I get seen at the last second and have to lead all the enemies that spawn back through the maze so I don't waste my ammo. The good part is that most of the enemies in the next few rooms are easily dispatched, either by stealth or by letting them gang up on me and putting them down all at once. I make it to Ashley again with 15 shells. And I wasn't sure that was going to help for the next section. I spent a little too much time on the power puzzle, and I deal with the regenerator by taking out its legs and running away. I do the same for the regenerator in the freezer, and then go to the age-old strat of stab while it's on the ground in an attempt to stop it from regenerating. It kinda works. I hightail it through the rest of the area to the holding area, and with no shells in my gun, I have to get the wrench with my knife. I take a lot of hits doing this, use up almost all my healing items too, but after over a minute of knifing, I secure it. Then it's just a matter of finishing the card and heading back to Ashley, collecting 3 shells that I end the chapter with. The third series of gun range challenges gets me nothing useful, and I rush through the scrapyard furnace and have to knife the Iron Maiden to death. Ashley gets carried off in the waste disposal after I run out of ammo, but my gun range skills actually come into play the second time around, clearing out most of the enemies before they reach her. I went into the wrecking ball room with only 3 shells, so most of my time here is spent sprinting around or cutting them up with my knife. The game does gift me a few shells and gunpowders to give me a fighting chance, but I succeed mostly by running in circles. The next big part is Krauser. I have 18 shells at the start of this fight, but need to use a lot of them early, either to stun Krauser, detonate the mines, or disarm the auto turrets. There's not a lot to gather from the drops, but I do get to the third part of his fight with 13 shells. I choose to focus on the knife for this part in an attempt to save ammo, but that broke. But some luck and a few shells to his face finished him off once and for all. I go into the next chapter with 12 shells and enough gunpowder to make more if I need to. Thankfully, I come into the next area with a helicopter by my side, so there's not much threat for me. I'm forced to use the turret to take out the anti-air gun, and after being keep-kicked by a Minotaur, I have to do the whole thing over again. Thankfully, the second time I make it through without a hitch, but with no shells yet again. So, I need to run past the Novistadors and get to the prison cells. I pick up a few shells there, but thankfully I've played this game enough to know that in that area, you don't need to fire at all. Just be calm and don't get too hasty, and you'll make it through without firing a shot. With 1 gun range left, I allow myself 1 shot at each challenge I didn't get a good score on. Unfortunately, I didn't do great, only requiring 1 silver token. So, no more charms. I try to save ammo in the next room, mostly by using my knife on the Novistadors and avoiding the Garrador soldiers, and after carrying Ashley through an Ingmar Bergman film, killing off the last Novistadors and selling all my excess to the merchant, I only have Sadler left to deal with. I went into the fight with 17 shells and a whole bunch of crafting items. For the first time in the game, I actually thought a boss fight would go decently, and surprisingly, it went even easier than that. The spread on the shotgun is rarely a plus, but in this fight it gave me a bunch of leeway. I didn't need to be perfectly accurate to hit the eyes. So long as I was within a decent range, I had no trouble popping them. The Novistadors aren't really a threat in this fight as long as you keep moving, and if you stab Sadler in the eye every chance you get, he goes down without being a threat at all. Honestly, the easiest fight of the entire run so far. Then, after that, it's just a matter of waiting for Ada to toss me a rocket launcher, finish off Sadler once and for all, say my goodbyes to the pretty lady, and escape with Ashley on a jet ski. And there you have it. Resident Evil 4 with only the W-870 and the knife. I'm gonna be honest, I thought this was gonna be way harder than it actually was. The troublesome areas in the regular game were still the troublesome areas in this run, and despite having way less ammo than normal, the double damage perk adds so much to my output that it made most of the encounters later way easier than I feel they should have been. Maybe I'll have to do it again without that perk. Thanks for watching. Till next time, bye bye.